The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Please forgive me for my late arrival to the session. I had some meetings with extremely important people in East Central Alberta. I thank the Prime Minister for calling a prompt by-election. I wonder if one day he might regret that decision.
I'm sure I speak for all parliamentarians in welcoming the member for Battle River Crowfoot back to the House of Commons. You may notice a few things have changed since he was here last.
Prime Minister Mark Carney and Opposition Leader Pierre Poilievre faced off in question period for the first time today. And while it started on that friendly note, that didn't last that long.
Liberal Prime Minister breaking promises, making excuses, running massive deficits with costs, crime, and chaos out of control. Mr. Speaker, when will the Prime Minister match the grand promises with the real change Canadians need?
I understand the Leader of the Opposition was busy. He missed the largest tax cut for 22 million Canadians. He missed the cut on the GST for new homes. He missed eliminating all federal barriers to trade. He missed, I hope I'll have another opportunity to finish a very long list of what the Leader of Opposition.
All right, we're going to start there with the power panel. Vandana Cotter was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And here with me in the foyer of the House of Commons, Rob Russo, the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Rob, you've got home field advantage, so let's start with you to continue the sports metaphor that Tim Hodgson likes to use. Well, what did you make of what we saw here today in terms of the approach that Pierre Poilievre took and the issues that they chose to highlight on day one?
I think a lot of people who voted in the last election thought Mr. Poilievre was too much the club but not enough the rapier. I think we saw a little less club, a little more rapier, a lot less rapper, a lot of the superficial three-word slogans.
Right.
And I thought that the tone, you're right, it didn't endure. It certainly didn't endure into the second, third, and fourth round of questions after the front bench took over. But the tone was interesting. So I did see an evolution there in Mr. Poilievre. In terms of the Prime Minister, who I thought did very, very well in the spring session, I thought he was a little less sure-footed today.
Getting heckled a lot more,
well,
right?
There's
running into the clock issue.
Well, sure. First of all, didn't manage the clock as well as he did in the spring. The other thing he did was he was asked the question once or twice in French and responded in English, which is, again, unusual, because one of the things I think we can say about the Prime Minister is his French has become much, much more relaxed, much more colloquial, I would say. He's not searching for words. His accent is much better. So I thought that was a little unusual as well. He seemed a little anxious to get at it. But an interesting first day. But a reminder, once again, we always wait. We wait for months. We speculate. I think a lot of the action is going to be between the people that you had on before us, and that's
the House leaders. Yeah, and we have the NDP leader and the Bloc House leader, Deputy House leader, or House leader coming on later in the show as well. Kate, I wonder what your first impression was. I mean, Pierre Poilievre returned with a good joke. You know, apologies for showing up late. But then we kind of got back to the same that you're not living up to any of your promises, and you've been an utter disappointment, Prime Minister, is kind of where it went. What are your thoughts on today?
Yeah, I think a lot of Conservatives are feeling energized by having Poilievre back in the House. I think that, you know, he really thrives there in terms of his ability to orate and test the government's ability to defend their record. And I thought, you know, to Rob's point, he did a good job of, you know, starting off on a friendly note. Obviously, this is day one and it's only just begun. I do think that a lot of the conversations that have been had with the House leader, and he alluded to this, I believe, in a conversation with your colleague Rosemary Barton, reaching out to the NDP and the Liberals, perhaps less certain about reaching out to the Conservatives. Now, Conservatives did support C5, and Conservatives have also said that they are absolutely on board with supporting legislation when it makes sense and it's the right thing to do for Canada. So we'll see if the vibes from the very first day back carry on into the rest of the session. I somehow am a bit skeptical about that.
Yeah, I mean, Brad, question period is kind of, it's a lot of theater. I don't know if people pay too much attention to it other than the partisans who often see the clips that that get put on the social media feeds of MPs. The real test is going to be in whether this parliament can function and cooperate, and whether the government can find partners to help get its agenda through. So how do you see that playing out now that all the characters are back in their places?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when there is a lot of policy alignment, where the direction, at least, that Mr. Carney says he wants to go with the Conservative agenda. You heard Andrew Scheer say, keep stealing our ideas, copy and paste. And I think what's going to be interesting within this Parliament is that when you have no strong Social Democratic NDP voice in the House of Commons, that is, Carney is going to be pulled to the right by the Conservative Party. And really, what was interesting today, aside from Andrew Scheer's, saying that the promises have already been broken, it's only been a handful of weeks, with the House sitting, that all that Mr. Poilievre really has is move faster. That is, you're not moving fast enough. The sense of urgency, when you by and large agree with the overall direction that Mr. Carney is going, then the only thing that you've got left to criticize is the speed with which Mr. Carney is working at. And so that runs a little stale after a while. It will be interesting to see which policies, which bills as they get tabled, the Conservatives will be supporting. And it'll be interesting to see how much of the left flank that Mr. Carney cedes, opening up opportunities for the NDP in its leadership race, could have to criticize the policies, not necessarily the speed with which Mr. Carney is heading with overall direction that he's taking the country.
Vandana, do you think the Mark Carney is being pulled to the right by the Conservative Party, or do you think the Liberals are being pulled to the centre by Mark Carney? I mean, how do you view this shifting dynamic and the movement of where the government's priorities and agenda is leaning?
I think if you compare it to Justin Trudeau's government, it looks like it's pulling to the right. But yeah, I think if you look at his middle tax class cut, if you talk about his support for workers, these are also progressive policies. So I don't think he's necessarily being pulled to the right. I think he's pulled to like a centrist type of ideology. But that being said, I don't think he would define it that way. I think he would see it as something pragmatic. This is a time to spend on defense spending, it's a time to protect workers in certain sectors. That is something that all Canadians across party lines will agree with. So I don't think he would define it that way, but I think just if you compare it to the last 10 years and some of the policies of Justin Trudeau, what he focused on versus what Mr. Carney's focusing on, obviously different time period, different time in the world, I think it just kind of seems like that.
So, but Vandana, just to stick with you, like all of these commitments, Stephen McKinnon was here earlier, and he's conceding the deficit will be substantial. Mark Carney says it will be larger than what we saw last year, but there's multiple sets of numbers that you can look at last year. I'm not sure which one we need to look at, but how high do you think they can conceivably allow a deficit to go in a budget that'll either come next month or maybe into November now, before it is simply too high? Because it was spend less to invest more. But if it's just a big deficit to pay for the things that they've already done, I mean, how high is too high now?
I think it depends who your audience is. I think there'll be people, policy think tanks and whatnot, who may say this is too high. I think the opposition will say it's too high. But I think if you want to talk to Canadians, the ones you're actually accountable to, those numbers are just figures. And when I worked with Dan Arnold in our polling back in the time at Prime Minister's office, those numbers aren't really tangible to a lot of people. So it's what are you getting out of it? So if there's concrete things that are coming out of it, now a number of the big budget ticket items are announced. If again, the sectoral supports, defense spending, all those items. So I don't think there'll be any surprises, but I don't think the numbers really connect to people in the same way. But it also depends on how the opposition litigates it. So if it comes something that what are we getting for it and they can't point to something that is easy to understand, then I think Canadians then take issue at it. But if people can really feel that, okay, you know what, I understand what I'm getting from this, it's the time we need to do it, I don't want austerity budget, I think Canadians can largely accept it. Okay,
Kate, I see your skepticism. I'm going to get you in a second, but first I want to go to Rob. But 60, 70, 80 billion, I don't know if that's what it's going to be, but outside of COVID times, I know Trump has hammered the revenue streams of the government and the tax cut and the defense spending, but those are historic deficits outside of like a black swan event.
Yes, and they're going to cause the government some problems. It was interesting to listen to Mr. Blanchet who I think the Liberals considered a natural dance partner, a confidence partner at a certain point. He had said that he wasn't going to try to bring the government down for a year. Before going into the House of Commons for question period today, he said that $100 billion deficit figure that has been tossed around would be the kind of thing that would give him pause. So there may be a cost to that. Now, I'm not sure that's going to give the government pause as much as we've already had 1 quarter of GDP decline. If there's another one this fall, we're in a recession. I think what might give the government a bit of a break is that there are probably going to be at least 1, if not 2, cuts in the overnight rate at the Bank of Canada that will ease not only Canadians' costs for mortgages and loans, but also the government's costs for borrowing against that larger number. But boy, he signaled, even in question period today, that there's some very difficult times coming. I think he called it one of the greatest economic crises in our history.
Yeah, so Kate, the number is going to be large. I don't think the austerity, to use that word, is going to be necessarily as deep as maybe some people anticipate. How do you think Canadians will react to that? Because do they accept that some of this is necessary and out of control, or do they do as Andrew Scheer was doing earlier, is like, this guy promised to do better, and so far he hasn't? How do you view it?
It's looking like more of the same. Spend more to invest more is really just looking like spend more to spend more. And when you think about where those major expenditures are, it's in policy areas and on matters that the government really owes kind of an explanation to Canadians on why there hasn't been action taken so far. The sector support strategy, for one, it's all predicated on an ongoing tariff dispute with the United States. That seems to be entirely off the government's radar for the time being. We don't have a status update on what we're tracking towards achieving an agreement. But again, the basis for that spending is on a continued tariff dispute with the U.S. We're still in the dark about that. Home building, the announcement from yesterday, that is going to create 0.1% of what CMHC says we need in terms of housing, the 4,000 units that the government has committed to. That is going to not even come close to that macro level target. And on defense spending, we are playing catch up massively to what other nations have done. And it's not just the last government, it's been successive governments, and I want to acknowledge that. But for Canadians who are going to see that deficit number likely in the tens of billions of dollars, how does that actually improve their day-to-day affordability, their day-to-day cost of living challenges? Those 3 things in particular really will not pass the test, in my view, of what Canadians are expecting this government to do in a moment of crisis, which again was a crisis moment defined by the Prime Minister. He was the one who intimated urgent action. So he can't now walk that back because governing is a lot harder than campaigning.
Right, but Brad, what's the timeline on urgent action, right? April 28th election, May cabinet swearing in. I mean, do people expect like magical results by the middle of September? Is it by the end of this year? Is it by the spring? I mean, where do you think the patience threshold is to see sort of tangible results?
Well, government should stop making 30-day timelines over which they have no control. That's the first thing. So be more generic in terms of when you can. I think we talked about it a couple of Mondays ago. Back to school, back to work. We're back in the fall now, and obviously the House is coming back. I think there was a turning point with the summer. I think there was basically a level of optimism and a lot of rooting for Carney to get something, get a deal done with the Americans, and get some of these things going through. And I think, while there wasn't, I think now people are starting to go, okay, well, where's the next big thing? Because while I think the opposition is their job to hold the government to account, to say, where's our things? I think people are, the average Canadian are more patient. But I think that now that we're in the fall and now that, the House of Commons is back, I think there's going to be a kind of an impatience about something has to be done. It doesn't all have to be done. It doesn't all have to be complete within the first few months of the Carney's mandate. But can he point to anything? This is as much about Canadians' impatience over Carney's action as it is about him and his expectations. So he's got to show something soon. Right. Otherwise, I think he's going to lose the plot with the audience that cares the most.
Yeah, Vandana, perhaps I should have also included the tearing up of the North American Trade Agreement as a bit of a black swan event, because what Donald Trump is doing is an unprecedented thing. So I will grant that on the challenge side of the ledger. And this is something obviously the Prime Minister has to manage, but can't necessarily control. But the housing agenda, the domestic economic agenda, clearly institutions are being put in place to help control that. So how do you see the timeline for patience here before Canadians need to start seeing some things? I don't know if the return to Parliament is the sort of thing that triggers in Canadians' minds, but it's going to put a lot of it more into the daily churn.
I think he has till like the spring. I think if you have shovels in the ground for some of these big projects, I think people can accept that. I think further into the summertime, you're having a harder time if you're running to government bureaucracy, if you're running to issues that maybe you can't get around, but people won't understand that. But I think he has strongly until the spring. I think Canadians still have a lot of trust in Mark Carney. I think they trust the path he's putting forward. I think they believe he has a plan and that he knows what he's doing. But I do think as we get past the springtime, that will become harder for people. So I think he needs to, and I think he's well aware of this, to make sure that he is showing how these projects are getting across the finish line and making waves in them.
Right. So, Rob, what do you think the timeline is for tolerance? Do you think Mark Carney has until the spring? Do you think it's that next year? Because, I mean, April 28th was not that long ago, and these are some pretty big problems.
As long as he has the enthusiastic backing of the Premier of Alberta.
That is, so Grey Cup, we'll see.
Yeah, he's in good shape.
Yeah.
I think that when he fails to deliver on what she's looking for, I think he might then be in trouble. But it suggests that there are very few sort of opportunities for Mr. Poilievre to attack on what I call the gimme putts, the first 5 projects. If he was looking for places to maybe go after, he might go after the next 5. Say, let's talk about those. But as long as he has the backing of Danielle Smith, he's golden.
Well, Kate, on that, it's not just the backing of Danielle Smith. It's Doug Ford, it's Tim Houston, it's Susan Holt, it's David Eby. It seems to be Scott Moe most of the time. The entire First Minister's table is kind of aligned behind this agenda. Even Danielle Smith to a degree we have not seen. Let's face it. And that there's no longer these proxy wars happening at the Fed Prov level that we saw in the Justin Trudeau years. So I mean, looking at that dynamic and comparing it to the return of Pierre Poilievre to the House, you have different messages coming from the Conservative leaders at the subnational level than we're seeing from the Conservative leader at the national level. What does that do to the political dynamic for the opposition leader?
Yeah. I'm not surprised that Alberta Premier Smith is pleased with the change in tone and approach, because it was so poor before under the previous administration that literally anything is better. I do think that the premiers are right to be excited, approach this with optimism. But when we're talking about people tuning out politics over the summer and coming back in, I think that's a very Ottawa conversation to be having. The problems that people have faced have not gotten they didn't go away over the summer, and now they're just tuning back into their affordability challenges. I think it's a bit of a Ottawa bubble myth that people tune out politics over the summer. Maybe, the government is paying more attention to these issues, but real people, it has not gotten easier for them to buy at home. It has not gotten easier for them to afford food. It's not the crime and immigration situation has not improved. So I think that is the message that that Poilievre's Conservatives are going to bring forward to the House this fall. That, to me, is the big contrast between what the Prime Minister is talking about in terms of an international agenda, and he's got a very heavy travel schedule lined up over the course of the next few months, and in a definitively domestic-focused agenda that the Conservatives are talking about, getting back to those local challenges here, which we saw before the return of Parliament have started to regain momentum in the eyes of voters and the minds of voters, surpassing the issues with the United States, surpassing the challenges that we have with Donald Trump. I think a lot more Canadians are engaged on these issues, just as they have been over the summer. But as we see Trump slide into the rearview mirror, I think this is where the Carney Liberals are going to have a struggle to show their work and show what they've been up to over the course of the last few months.
Right, and we saw today in question period to focus on food inflation and the cost of groceries. And I just want to play a clip, Brad, before we come to you. This is from Conservative Party leader Melissa Landsman, who was asked today what to expect from Conservatives in this fall sitting, and it lines up with that. Just have a listen to this.
I think you heard our priorities. They're the priorities of Canadians. we still have an immigration crisis, we have a housing crisis, we have a cost of living crisis. So we're going to oppose the government where it makes sense. We are going to support things that make sense, and we are going to expose what they're not telling us.
Okay, so Brad, that aligns with sort of the topics, in a Jeopardy category style, that we heard today in question period. But connecting that back to what I just asked Kate, if the premiers are largely saying the government is doing the right thing or on the right path, does that change how that message is heard with Canadians? Because before, the premiers were all saying the federal government was blowing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think it's a very important component to having multi-party premiers championing those things. And those projects in the first 5 are not going to be finished by Christmas. So that support from those premiers, as long as it's nurtured, that relationship with each of the first ministers, they should still be on side unless this government does something that is so egregious that it overcomes the support that they're getting for these projects. So I think the second list of these projects of national interest will be also very important. But if you take a look at what members of cabinet have signaled, and you talked about this with the government House Leader McKinnon at the top of the show, bail reform. Tories want to see some bail reform. We've heard that the Justice Minister is going to be tabling some. The immigration issue. Poilievre has suggested that they should abolish the temporary foreign workers. We'll see if the government comes forward with any amendments. But when the opposition has signaled so clearly, and I think that many Canadians, these aren't niche issues. I think these are issues that were really bungled under the Trudeau administration. As long as the Liberals keep tabling bills and keeping things in a committee that touch on those areas, they're going to crowd the Conservatives out. This is the whole point. When the Conservatives set their agenda and the Liberals then follow it, because there's nobody on the left trying to draw them over here, but they'd rather go over here, then it's going to make Melissa Lantsman's job hard, Poilievre's and Scheer's job a lot harder, because the government will be saying we're working on these issues like bail reform or immigration. And then the Tories are just left to say, well, you're not moving fast enough. And once you're in the urgency, you're not moving fast enough, I know from the opposition days that that's not the best place to be in.
Yeah, well, Vandana, I was struck by something Stephen McKinnon said earlier also on the bail reform issue, that they're going to clean up the issues that are in their responsibility, which is the legislation and the legal framework, which is fine. But there's a whole bunch of other problems in the justice system that are provincial, and that has to do with not enough prosecutors, not enough case managers, justices of the peace handling complex issues, not enough prison guards and not enough prison space. And they're going to put the spotlight for the responsibility, it sounded like to me, on the premiers to deal with that, because they've gotten a little bit off the hook on some of those issues.
Yeah, and I think that's where Prime Minister Carney's relationships with premiers across the country and the strength of those is going to work out really well. I think if you show some cross collaboration in how maybe there's ways to support the provinces in these items, maybe there's joint press conference about it. So I think if people see that they're working together on the structural pieces of it, I think that works. And I think what happened in the last government, just the challenges we face, is that it was like a blame game. So then everyone's unhappy, right? So Doug Ford's blaming Mr. Trudeau, and at the time he was unpopular. So it was easy for people to buy into the narrative that it's the federal government's fault. I think Mark Carney is trying to take a more collaborative approach to governing as a whole. And I think what he's trying to do, I think where he sees those structural issues, is let me work with the provinces on a number of items, including bail reform, because it's something Doug Ford has talked about. We're seeing increasing crime in a number of areas. So I think it's in the Premier's interest to do so. So I think that's where Canadians can buy into the fact that these are getting solved.
Right. So, Rob, do you see this as his relationship, the Prime Ministers with Premiers helping him on this, or does this become a potential fault line? Because the unity at the First Minister's table held together through the first list of projects. Second list of projects, though, they've been a bit more emphatic that they want to see certain things there, and if they don't all get it, you start saying no to people, and that's where governing gets a whole lot harder.
Yeah, but I don't think that we're there for a while yet. And in the meantime, the government is looking to survive. And survival seems to be, I thought, an interesting discussion that already happened. I heard Mr. McKinnon say before he came on that principles are important to the Liberal Party, but the details of their legislation might be less important. So they're prepared to discuss details.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, at the same time, let's think about who would be disadvantaged. If the government fell, if we had the nightmare scenario of going into an election again, who would be disadvantaged? I think New Democrats would be disadvantaged. They don't have much money. They don't have a leader. I think Mr. Poilievre would be disadvantaged in the Conservatives because he's fighting for his life again. I'm not sure Mr. Blanchet would be advantaged as well. He's got...
I will make no predictions on the minds of Quebec voters because that is a fool's game.
It was interesting to hear him lead his question with a question about that Black Swan event that you were talking about, the fact that we're in a trade war with the United States. Clearly, that's a concern of Quebecers. Would it be a disadvantage for Liberals to go back? I might argue it might be an advantage given if there are people who are predicting a recession, wouldn't you want to get ahead of that recession rather than govern through it? There are not many people who would be advantaged. Lots of people would be disadvantaged. I'd say most of them are on the opposition benches.
Well, Kate, just on that, like, I don't want to go through false manufactured drama of minority government in crisis, election imminent is going to fall. Like, nobody really thinks anything like that is in the cards right now with everything that is going on, right? Like, it's really about how much water do you have to take in your wine to make progress on the things where there is at least overlap.
Rob spoke to fault lines. I think we will see those fault lines when we have a real trade agreement and negotiation to discuss with our largest trading partner. It seems like a Herculean task to align the interests of Ontario and the auto industry, Quebec and supply management, and Alberta with their minerals and resources, and emerge from those conversations in a position of strength. Vice what we have right now. So I think that's where you'll start to see some of the fault lines. And just to that point, I think that when the next election happens, will be far less about parliamentary cooperation in the House, though I believe that that's what Prime Minister Carney will blame as the rationale for the election and the lack of that consensus and getting things done. I think, if anything, it is going to be determined by how long President Trump is in the White House for. I think he will not run the next election without having Trump as a boogeyman that he can go back to voters and say, you still need me in this position, and with a strengthened majority mandate in order to get things done. And I need that majority in order to do so. So I would be looking far less to the tone in the House in terms of what it means for the future of this government, and much more to the relationship with the United States, because it is how Carney came to power, and I think it's how he's going to propose to stay in power.
Okay, Vanda, I got a tight 30 seconds to give you the last word. I mean, what do you like? Do you think there is any prospect of an election anytime in the next 12 months, or is that just we should put that out of the way?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll say this, like, shortly after the election, I mean, the Prime Minister, we were speaking about some transition items, and he did say he hasn't planned to do that anytime soon. You would have to have a really hard, you have to showcase the House is completely inoperable and he cannot do his job, which I don't think is in any party's interest to do. So no, I don't see that happening. I don't see him even thinking about that. I think he's moving forward as it is. And Kenyans will see what happens.
Yeah, I don't have the batteries. I don't have the gas tank for the election. So, like, the Newfoundland one is happening. That's enough to keep me occupied right now. We're out of time. We'll talk about this again. Vanda Nakata, Kate Harrison, Brad Levine, and Rob Russo. Thank you all so much.